Welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's only daily television platform for small businesses. We bring you the right information to empower you, the SME entrepreneur. Tonight on the show, an exclusive conversation with John Chambers. He is the Chairman Emeritus of Cisco. He's also the former CEO of Cisco, and in his present role, he is the founder and CEO of JC2 Ventures, investing into entrepreneurs and startups. John, such a pleasure having you here with us on the Leaders of Tomorrow. In this exclusive conversation, talking all things entrepreneurship, startups, and leadership as well. So it's exciting to be speaking with someone like yourself. I want to start this conversation by asking you, you've now turned investor after more than 25 years of being the chairman and the CEO at Cisco. You now are an investor. What are maybe one or two things that you look at when you're investing into businesses?
Well, you know, the fun part is, if you were to look at my 25 years at Cisco, I acquired 180 companies, 12 of them over $1 billion. And so I've been an investor for a while. But what I'm really doing now is more of a strategic partnership role with startups and trying to change the world one more time. Because I believe startups will be the primary generator of jobs, innovation, and economic growth. The large companies will probably not add jobs over the next decade because of artificial intelligence, automation, digitization. So when I look for, in terms of my startups, it's very similar to what I used to do with acquisitions. We had our 8 major goals from acquisitions. They were our innovation playbook, and most people believe that we did the best job in the world in terms of acquisitions, and they taught our process in Harvard and Stanford, et cetera, at business school. With the startups, it's a very similar approach. The first thing I look for in startups is I look for a market or business transition, i.e. Economic transition going on enabled by a new form of technology. And that's like, for example, what Amazon did to Walmart a number of years ago, or what Uber is doing to the transportation industry. Second thing I look for is a world-class CEO. And without exception, if you're going to have a great company, you just got to have an unusually smart, talented CEO who wants to be coached. She or he knows what they know and knows what they don't. And they want a true strategic partner to help them grow. Third thing I look for was only one Steve Jobs. He knew what to build. He didn't ask much input from anybody, but it also took him 7 years to do it. What I always did, whether it was acquisitions or now with my startups, is I find out who their top customers are, and I ask the top customers, what do they really think of this organization and this company and this CEO? Then I look, is this company capable of being the number 1 or number 2 player in their segment of the market with at least 30 to 40% market share? And then I look at how close they are to an inflection point. Is it about to take off? So that's kind of the rule that I use for startups. And candidly, as an investor, people looking in to invest, that's almost the same criteria I would use if I were them.
Some of the companies that you've invested in, including, say, Lucidius, you also play the role of a mentor who's very actively involved in the business. Why is that necessary? Why is that your model?
Well, first, the majority of startups, probably 98% of them, will eventually fail. Secondly, many startups do not have a mentor, an advisor that really helps them grow and scale. And third, today's startups are waiting much longer before they go public or before they even get to unicorn type status. And so traditional VCs who are good in the early stages aren't as good about scaling and operations. So what I try to do is strategically partner, to be a coach with them. I help them on everything from, when you look at a CEO, you evaluate him or her on their vision and strategy. You evaluate them on how they're doing developing, recruiting, and retaining their team. You evaluate them on what most young startup entrepreneurs miss, the importance of culture and what is your culture. And then fourth, communications are huge skill sets. So I help my startups in each category. So whether it's Lucidius with Saket Modi, who's just amazing, or Unifor with Umesh, I evaluate them on, we work constantly on the vision and strategy and review it literally monthly. We usually talk at least 2 to 3 times a week, either by texting or talking. I help them recruit and develop and retain their leadership team. And for example, I'm helping Saket with a key recruit that he's doing right after this, doing a video session to try to recruit that person. We then spend a lot of time on culture, and that's one of the things that young CEOs, you never have a great company without a great culture. You may or may not like the culture, but underneath a Microsoft, a Cisco, a Walmart is a very strong culture on it. And then communications is becoming so important today, and a large part of communications is how you listen, how you deal with media, how you communicate to your employees and your investors. And 2 decades ago, you could be a brilliant CEO and get away with it just being average on communications. Not in today's world.
Okay, so you're saying 98% of startups are bound to fail.
90% of them will. Yes.
90% of them will, not just bound to, but will. Through this interview, maybe 1 or 2 things that you want to tell the entrepreneurs watching this to say, this is what you should be watching out for.
Oh, okay, great. Several things.
Okay.
The 4 characteristics that I just said about a CEO, stick on those 4.
Sure.
Secondly, as basic as this sounds, say where should you spend your time on those 4 and actually track it, and you'll be shocked. You spend a lot of time where you should not as a young entrepreneur. Okay. Third thing is understand your sustainable differentiation both today and in the future, and if it isn't there, you're not going to survive on it. And fourth, surround yourself with people that complement the areas you're not as strong on and create an open culture for communications. But if I were to say the one thing this group will probably do the same thing the US Silicon Valley people do, they'll underestimate how important culture is. How important culture is to have a great company. Are you truly making innovation happen? Are you truly customer driven or not? Are you truly a family? Or are you a Netflix, which by the way is not a family, but they're a professional football team where it's up or you're out in terms of its capability? Do you just do the right thing? Do you only hire people that are really good people? In other words, no jerks.
Sure.
And the CEO has to own that. So if there's one element that I think your listeners might underestimate on entrepreneurship and startups, it's the importance of culture.
Most of the workforce here in India are now in the 25-year-old age group. They're mostly millennials.
Yes.
For entrepreneurs and for leaders who are watching this interview to say, how do I deal differently with millennials in the workforce?
Yes.
What would you have to say?
Going with millennials, different things motivate them. One of the reasons Cisco was so successful is that we retained our people in an industry that has 15% turnover. My turnover was only 5%.
Okay.
And we created a family-like environment. Millennials want to work for something more than just a job and a paycheck, and also more than just being successful. They want to make a difference in society. And then you've got to get them involved and challenge them.
Sure.
My son has already had 5 different jobs, and he's now joined me as a partnership. I only had 3 jobs in my life. And so millennials, I think the employers have to understand, will move more frequently. And if you're going to keep them in your company, you've got to get an environment that really is socially aware of the changes, that is really fun,
Sure.
and people can achieve their careers, aspirational goals, personal and business.
Okay, I want to take a big picture view and talk about how perhaps Indian startups are very different from what you've seen globally. Are they any different?
The honest answer is no.
Okay.
You know, it's so interesting. When I came to India a number of years ago with Cisco, I was giving, every single time we talked about culture being part of a huge part of what the CEO should own and constantly reinforce. And I said, I got a question for the audience, 5,000 people in the audience, and the person in the back row said, John, you don't understand. Culture can't be the same around the world as it is in India. It's different cultures, and Cisco's culture must be different. And so then I had fun, TV cameras were on me, and because there was 5,000 people, I walked off, I pulled my cultural badge out, and I said, change the way the world works, lives, learns, and plays. Is that different in India? No. Make innovation happen, is that different? No. Just do the right thing, is that different? No. Customers first, is that different? The point that I'm making is that the values for successful startups are the same. And even in France, which used to be the worst place in the world to do business, in Europe just 5 years ago, and they've made a tremendous transformation under Macron. When I met with the 77 French startups 4 years ago at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I met with all of them because I heard France was changing, it was just like I was in Silicon Valley. The questions were identical, except the accent was funny. And I speak with an accent, so I can tease on that. So the questions that I get about startups here, and I talk to probably 40 different sessions a month, both here in the US and around the world, are identical. And the characteristics that make startups successful are almost identical as well.
But it's no surprise that Indian startups still have a long ways to go before they compare perhaps with the ones that you see in Silicon Valley or even in Israel. If you were to see the startup ecosystem here in India rival what we're seeing globally, what should change really?
Well, first of all, I think the startup system in India, if done right, will not only rival, it'll be among the leaders a decade from now. What is going right? Your engineering schools, your IITs, et cetera, produce the best and brightest engineers in the world. And they do it in English and in a democracy. And interesting enough, half my startup founders in the U.S., out of my 16 companies in the U.S. I invested in, are first or second generation Indians on it. So there are many things the country's doing right in terms of talent, the education system, et cetera, on it. In terms of what you really think to create the right environment for startups, if you're in a government perspective, you have to basically deal with the bankruptcy laws, which they did. The goods and services tax, it allowed for free flow. That was very important. Demonetization was a huge move. And you've got to say, how do you restructure the country to be a startup nation? That starts with the leader of the nation, Prime Minister Modi, owning it, then putting in a position where startups fit into his digital agenda and where it fits into job creation as you go forward.
Sure.
So it's just like a CEO of a company outlining the vision for the country, what are the elements to make that happen, and where do startups fit in with.
I'm going to take a very quick break on that note, John, but we will continue this exclusive conversation with John Chambers on the other side, discussing entrepreneurship and his advice for entrepreneurs in India. To stay tuned, back in just a short bit. Welcome back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow, and tonight I'm continuing an exclusive conversation with John Chambers, getting his advice and top tips for entrepreneurs and what he thinks it's going to take for Indian startups to be on par with their global peers. So that brings me really to the role of the government.
Yes.
We speak to a lot of entrepreneurs and the opinion on this is really divided. So I'm curious to understand, on what side of the argument you are. Entrepreneurs on one hand say the government should have a hands-off approach. That's the only way innovation can be allowed to flourish. Other entrepreneurs say, no, we do need a regulatory framework, and this in a country where even the definition of startup, it really hasn't been defined.
Yes.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, in the reverse role, a startup in today's environment often goes to 10 or 15 years before it's considered not a startup. In fact, the average startup in Silicon Valley before it went public was in existence this last year for 10 years. Secondly, that startup framework has to actually be embedded even in the large companies with a startup mentality. I used to have the view of your first group, which is the further away government was, the better, and I was wrong. Government and startups and business have to work together to the benefit of the society and also to create the right regulatory framework or regulatory light framework to make things happen. So I think the role of government and business and startups working together. India has been one of the, and probably the most responsive government in the world over the last 4 to 5 years on here are the legitimate concerns of business and job creation and how do we address them.
Let me put you on the line, then ask you what perhaps is going to take for India to produce an Alibaba or for India to produce maybe an Uber.
Time. Because I used the example earlier, many people say, well, John, if the startup industry is so strong in India, why aren't we creating more jobs? And when are we going to be able to absorb the 1.2 million jobs per month that are needed in this country for the young people coming in the workforce? And I'll just use the 2 examples of the companies I gave before. Almost 75% of your jobs are created after you go public or after you become a unicorn.
Sure.
And so startups, and I have 2 startups that are growing at 3x, both of them increased their headcount by 50% this last year, but they went from 100 to 150 or 60 and from 120 to 200. If they play out over the next 3 years the way that we hope they will, both of them will do more job growth in 2 years than they did in the 10-year history of one and the 7-year history of the other. And if we become unicorns, then they do more job growth that last year than they had in the 12 to 14 years before in 1 year. So it takes time. Secondly, the startups have moved from being a follow-on to what was done in the US or a clone to what was done in the US to deep tech implementation. And a lot of credit to your schools and the accelerators that are going on there and the pipeline that's being developed. So I think it will happen. The one thing that I think has to be more effective is the large Indian enterprise companies have to create an environment where they give startups access to their business, and they've got to learn that really innovation in the future, and I'll use Boeing in the US with one of my startups, Spark Cognition, the large U.S. companies actually look to startups not just to help them do innovation, but change the game.
Sure.
Spark Cognition in Texas, only 200 people, artificial intelligence, partners with Boeing, 50-50 joint venture. 200 people, 50-50 joint venture to do the next generation unmanned FAA architecture.
Do you think that's a crucial model where small businesses are partnering with larger businesses?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there was an example with Lucidius with Bombay Stock Exchange. Basically, the Bombay Stock Exchange, a 143-year-old company, reinventing itself, partnering with a startup on security and the ability to provide a understanding to their 1,100 brokers. How do you have a secure environment? What's working or not? Where they provide the safe capability, the product that Lucidius that builds to their customer set. Okay. So again, not just innovation together, but actually being a reseller and a partner to implement that.
Okay, so I want to talk innovation.
But that's the real exception in India.
Absolutely. Okay.
And we need many more exceptions.
Many more of those. Okay, so let's talk innovation. And this is a two-part question. Okay. The first part is whether you're happy with the kind of innovation that you're seeing here in India. And the second part is that India is a very unique country in the sense that there's a clear and great divide between India and Bharat, between what's happening in the metros and what's happening in the tier 2, tier 3, where yes. you have the real market. Do you see enough innovation, and do you think more entrepreneurs should be innovating for these markets where perhaps technology is not going to be the best solution, where the challenges and the solutions are going to be very different?
In terms of the geographic implementation of startups and technology in those locations, every company of the future will be a technology company. It doesn't matter if you're in retail, manufacturing, healthcare, government. Technology will be half of what you do. Okay. So Tesla is a technology company. Uber is a technology company. Amazon is a technology company in terms of the direction. India is very similar to the U.S. 60% of your venture capital goes into 3 metropolitan areas. The good news is now 40% goes outside those. The U.S. has the same issue. The vast majority of the investments go into Silicon Valley, Texas, and New York. Mm-hmm. If that doesn't change, you're not going to be able to get the income growth, the job creation in the other 26 states here in India, in the U.S., in the other 47 states. And so I think this is where government and business must work together to create the right environment to get these startups going in every state in India and every state in the U.S. We have almost identical problems because we're leaving behind in the U.S. the central part of the nation and the southeast, and that changes voting patterns and it changes income levels, etc. So you've got to do it with a vision of how you do this inclusive and especially inclusive of women. We've made good progress in India in the last 2 years. But nowhere near what we need to do. If you would have equal representation of women in terms of the workforce, you'd grow your GDP 3 to 4 points faster.
It's interesting you're talking about women entrepreneurs. Research in India shows that of all the funding that came into the ecosystem in 2018, less than 5% of that went into businesses founded by women. Do you think that's perhaps something that's reflecting across the world as well, or is it just an Indian problem? No, it's a problem everywhere in the world, and I use the U.S. as an example, and these numbers I'm very familiar with. A U.S. CEO, female, who has identical idea to her male counterparts gets funded at 1/3 the level. The number of female CEOs are actually decreasing in the U.S., and so I think it's a major issue. The second thing is we also need to address entrepreneurism and technology at a much earlier level and attract women into the field in this, using the U.S. term, in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, because that's often when people decide their career path or what they enjoy or don't enjoy in terms of the direction. Women also, 60% of them will tell you they do not have a key mentor and advisor. And I'm a huge believer in diversity. First, it's the right thing to do, but second, it's really good for business. Sure. I had 30% of my board female before anybody even talked about that number. Out of my top leadership team, but including engineering, the very top leaders were female. However, there just is not enough in the feeder system to get to that 50-50 number that should be done. The startups can change this, and you can change it in a very simple way. If for each time you have an open position, you require 1 female to be interviewed, just 1, your numbers change dramatically. And once you have a chance to look at diversity, and then you start to hire to that,
your numbers will go up dramatically. And so using Unifor as an example, they put that program in place.
Sure.
And they went from 23% female to 37% female in their company in just 18 months.
Sure.
Now that's where startups, I think, get it and can make the difference. And remember, they'll be the job creation engine for the future.
Okay.
So perhaps these millennials you talked about earlier, you're all going to be the ones that change it.
Speaking of millennials, there's also an interesting statistics, and I'm sure that you're aware of this. NASSCOM, the IT industry body, has said that less than 20% of all students coming out of colleges today have the skill sets for the jobs for which they're being hired. How can that be fixed?
Well, that is true also in the U.S. Okay. And what we're doing is we're preparing people where the jobs of the past are, not the jobs of the future. So I think you've got to get back to where are the skills and how do you train for that. People talk about STEM. I think STEM is nice, but I'm more interested in technology and entrepreneurship. Sure. So I think STEM is, let's move it to the side. Let's train people in technology and entrepreneurship at a much earlier age and make it exciting in terms of the direction. Secondly, the schools ought to be focused on how well they're doing about placing people in the jobs that are the future. Third, something that will surprise people, perhaps as soon as a decade from now, people will be much more interested in your skills than your degrees.
Sure.
And so there'll be skills competency testing that will be different, and I think there'll be different ways to address some of the education issues.
And I really want to understand from you, in a previous interview you've said that all companies need to think like startups or they will fade out. Yes. What do you really mean by that?
Well, what startups do is they address the market. They identify the market transition going on, the technology transition going on. They think about how they're going to do it different than they did before, and they're willing to disrupt.
Sure.
What gets established companies in trouble is they miss the market transitions, especially the technology transitions like General Motors did, like Walmart did, like even Tesla did versus Uber. You've got to disrupt or you're going to be disrupted, and what will get you in trouble is doing the right thing too long. Third is you have to reinvent your company every 5 years. Not every 10 or 15 like it was in the past. And you've got to be customer driven. Okay. Many of the products are often similar. If you're not really focused on your customer, you're not going to be successful.
Okay. My last question then is on your book.
Yes.
You came out with a book saying Connecting the Dots.
Yes.
What dots should entrepreneurs be connecting? What do you want to leave them with?
Well, the reason I wrote the book is when I talk to young entrepreneurs or established companies and even government leaders, very top government leaders around the world, the questions were identical. Okay. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. I gave you a book at the beginning, and
I look forward to reading it
and give me the constructive feedback.
John, thanks very much for your time with us here tonight on The Leaders of Tomorrow. That wraps up this conversation. If you have any feedback for us, as always, we love hearing from you. Do get in touch. Here's our email ID, leadersoftomorrowtimesgroup.com. Get in touch with us on social media. Tweet at me personally at Sunanda_J or our official Twitter handle, LOT_ET Now. Reach us on our Facebook page, Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. As per the new tri-tariff order, you now have the power to choose and pay only for the channels you love. To keep watching Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now, call your cable or DTH operator and get the Times movies and news pack now.
The Showstoppers, the Jaw Droppers, the Movers and Shakers.
These are some of the hard facts.
The Power Players. All the blockbusters. All the hard hitters in one power punch.
That's awesome.
Complete your TV viewing experience with the best of Hollywood entertainment and news. Get the Times Movies and News Pack at just 13 rupees. Ask your cable or DTH provider now.